Secretary General, dear General Vinia, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to welcome you in Warsaw at the NATO Resilience Symposium. We are gathering here in extraordinary and challenging times for our countries, for Europe and the whole world, but especially for Ukraine, which since then already 2 months has been resisting Russia's brutal aggression. I'm sure that when we started to plan this event last year, few of us expected that our deliberations would be so strongly affected by the most serious security crisis in our continent since the end of World War II. The ongoing Russian invasion on sovereign Ukraine shattered our convictions that the horror of full-scale war in Europe belonged to the past. The unprovoked attack, facilitated by Belarus, has confirmed Russia's readiness to pursue its neo-imperial ambitions through military means. Moreover, it has also shown that the Kremlin is ready to undertake the risk of military actions which are also potentially costly for Russia. All of that combined gives us a grim picture of the Russian leadership, which will stop at nothing but to achieve its delusional objectives, even at the expense of its own people and regardless of the inevitable international isolation, consequently making Russia and its President Vladimir Putin international pariahs, as President Biden has accurately pointed out. From the outset of this conflict, EU and NATO members, as well as their partners from all around the world, have responded with a package of comprehensive and heavy sanctions, restricted economic, financial, and individual relations with Russia, as well as the access of its state-owned media to our audience. At the same time, we have engaged an extensive support to Ukraine, providing humanitarian, economic, and military assistance. Our strong and coherent response to Russia's actions has inevitably been a shocking surprise for Moscow and exposed us on retaliatory measures from Russia, with unlawful suspension of gas supplies to Bulgaria and Poland as its most recent step in that regard. We should have no doubts here that the long-crafted European energy dependence on Russian hydrocarbons, coal, natural gas, and oil, has also played an important role in Russian preparations for the war and was aimed at weakening our response. The same as Russia's attempts to interfere in electoral processes in some of our countries, cyber attacks that can be dated back as far as to 2007 in Estonia, and as well as hybrid attacks with irregular migration against the EU border that began in the second part of last year. It's worth noting that the latter is still being waged along the Polish border, despite the unprecedented flow of war refugees from Ukraine who have found shelter in Poland. It's worth mentioning that more than 3 million Ukrainians have already crossed Polish border since the 24th of February. The likelihood of further intensification of Russian activities below the threshold of war against NATO states in response to political military support provided to Ukraine is significant. All of that clearly shows us that the change in the security environment of Europe, and especially on NATO's eastern flank, that had started in 2014 or even earlier in Georgia in 2008, persists and will continue to do so. It is very unlikely that Russia, even if defeated in Ukraine, will reevaluate the anti-Western paradigm of its foreign and military policy, as well its attitude towards the current international order. It will continue to perceive us as adversaries and make deliberate and more sophisticated attempts to weaken our capacities and will to resist its neo-imperial ambitions. We also still do not know the full extent to which the Russian invasion on Ukraine will impact the world's food security. The rising prices of agricultural products may cause another wave of migration to our borders. Poland and Ukraine are already working together in order to increase the use of Poland's transport infrastructure to export Ukrainian agricultural production on the world's markets. Having all of the above mentioned in mind, the only thing we can be sure of is that our security environment will be more and more challenging and unpredictable, and thus will require more of a whole-of-country approach, better integration, both civilian and military capabilities, in order to make us more resilient. Poland, as Russia's neighbor, and both NATO and the EU flank country, attaches great importance to strengthening its resilience. The recent suspension of gas flow to our country may be the best example of that, as we have been aware of such possibility and preparing for it for years. With LNG terminal in Świnoujście, Baltic pipeline nearly ready, gas interconnectors with our neighbors, as well as our own supplies. We are also pleased that the concept of resilience plays an increasingly important role in the works of NATO and the EU. As with regard to NATO, an important step was made here in Warsaw during the NATO summit in 2016, when heads of states and governments issued the commitment to enhance resilience, which made that topic one of the leading ones within NATO. Although resilience is first and foremost a national responsibility, Poland strongly supports further works within both organizations aimed at coordinating and facilitating those efforts, as strengthening our individual resilience contributes to the resilience of our whole community. We believe that our future efforts in that regard should be guided by three principles. Firstly, the focus on key areas such as cyber and disinformation threats, strengthening energy security, impact of the development of new technologies on security and defense, ensuring the security of supply chains and strengthening social resilience. Secondly, we should strive to further develop cooperation in that regard between NATO and the EU, as both organizations have various mutually reinforcing tools in that regard. Thirdly, we should also increase our cooperation and support in building resilience to our partners, especially those facing aggression or increased pressure from Russia, namely Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, as well as the Balkan ones. I'm glad that tomorrow there will be the whole panel devoted to partnerships. Increased support to partners is and has always been Poland's priority within both EU and NATO. Our cooperation with partners cannot be perceived, though, as a one-way street. We have capacities and instruments to help them, but we should be ready to learn from their experiences as well. Ukraine is the best example here. We all have been heavily involved in defense reforms and defense capacity building in Ukraine since 2014, through NATO and other multilateral mechanisms, as well as bilateral activities. That support now is clearly paying off for Ukraine. We are watching with a strong admiration how the Ukrainian armed forces and the whole society are holding off Russia's offensive. The effectiveness of Ukrainian defense, as well as heroism shown on the battlefield, inspires respect among people all over the world. Ukrainians have also shown that, despite differences in military potential, Russia can be beaten if the proper strategy is implemented. The course of the invasion, as well as failure of Russia's initial plans, are a sign of extraordinary resilience of the Ukrainian state and society. It seems that Vladimir Putin has underestimated not only the will of ordinary Ukrainians to resist and fight, but also the effectiveness of governmental institutions to operate in such circumstances. Russia has failed to break the spirit of Ukrainians. Polls are showing that a grand majority of citizens believe in the final victory over the invaders. Russian propaganda efforts, disinformation, and various forms of manipulation in relation to Ukraine's society has fallen on deaf ears. And various state institutions, despite obvious difficulties, are continually carrying out their constitutional tasks, maintaining the continuity of governance and Ukraine's statehood. War in Ukraine also shows how the concept of territorial defense is working in practice. Motivated, patriotic, and well-commanded volunteers may become a highly effective tool in both fighting an enemy and supporting civilians in war-affected areas. It's worth noting that Ukraine has built its territorial defense forces using inter alia Poland's model. To conclude, let me underline that Ukraine is inevitably a huge testing ground for the concept of resilience, and we should learn our lessons from its experiences. That is why, wishing you a fruitful discussion and great time in Warsaw, I hope that the next NATO Resilience Symposium will be held in Ukraine. Thank you for your attention.